Good day, my dudes. This is Professor Matt, and this is the Too Many Guys Soccer Show. And I have my notes, I have my kvass. It is Monday, the 29th of July, and that means it's Eastern Europe time. It's been a bit since we've done this, right? The last time I did a proper Eastern Europe video was at the end of May when the Ukrainian league was wrapping up. And I had mentioned, I was going to shoot out Kazakhstan slash Belarus update at some point during the summer. And things happen. We had the Euros, we had the Cup of America. I unexpectedly was given a second summer two course. Right, there's another project that I've been working on, which I can't really talk about at the moment. But the things have occupied my time. However, both the Kazakh and Belarusian leagues are about halfway done and dusted. We've reached the midway point of those seasons, right? Because they're on the old Soviet spring through autumn calendars. And the Ukrainian Premier League is going to be starting up this weekend. God willing, without a hitch, right? Because there's been a rather big story in relation to that, which we'll get into today. And then I do want to talk about a couple transfers or potential transfers involving a league which we don't talk about any for rather obvious reasons, but which I think are potentially important or interesting. So, what I want to do is begin with just an update about the two leagues that are on the spring autumn calendar. So let's get into it, shall we? Kazakhstan. Right. And I haven't watched as much of the Kazakh Premier League as I was last summer because again, other tournaments are going on. But I have been catching some matches the last couple of weeks since the Euros and the Copa have ended. And look, we have a title race, and your professor, Professor Matt's team, Kairat, are in the thick of it. It's crazy what a couple transfers can do. Liverpool, keep that in mind. In first place is last year's champions, Ordubase, on 26 points. However, in second is Kairat at 25 points with a better goal difference, right? And then rounding out the European places in third is Akobe at 22. Technically, they're tied with Yelme, but Akobe has a much better goal difference. But so that can swing, however. So because first place gets Champions League qualification, and then second and third it's Conference League. So uh what to make of this? It's pretty tight on top. And the reason for that is look, Ordubase is a very good team. Right, they have the league's joint top goal scorer in Yasherbek Yakshibayev, who, if that name sounds vaguely familiar, he was at Liga Warszawa in Poland for a cup of coffee, but I think most of us would remember him as the guy who scored the winning goal for Sheriff Tiraspol against Real Madrid in the Champions League a couple years ago. It's good to see him, finding work and close to home, right? He's an Uzbek international. Right. So, they've been what as good as they were last season. Kairat was frustrating last year because Kairat scored the most goals, but their goal difference was ass. And I think I mentioned last year it was like watching Brendan Rodgers Liverpool. All offense, no defense. Well, when the transfer window opened, the summer one, they poached two players who I was familiar with from the Russian Premier League, both center backs, by the way. Alexander Martinovich, Belarus, I believe former Belarusian international. He's about 34. And a young Russian center back, Igor Sorokin, who came up through FC Krasnodar's academy some years back and never really fulfilled his potential. I mean, I haven't watched the Russian league the last couple of years, so I don't know what his progress is. He's still relatively young. He's 24. Uh, they they've been a revelation. it's been night and day. And, all of a sudden, if you look, goals win matches, goals win titles. But you also have to, make sure your faucet isn't leaky. And the faucet, it does not leak anymore. So it's been a lot of fun watching them, and it's been cool. Like, uh, they can play this sort of high line that they've been playing the last couple of years, sort of attractive, offensive football, and you're in good you're in good hands in the back. So yeah, like we have a title race, guys, and this is pretty cool. There's only 1 point separating top and bottom, first and second, right? And Kairat has the better goal difference. And right, there's only 4 points separating for first and third. So it's going to be fun down the stretch, I assume. Uh, Belarus also on match day 15, also at the sort of midway point. Uh, Beginning the season, I didn't know what to make of this league. Right. Nothing seemed to make sense. Well, things have, calmed down a little bit, and there seems to be order in the world again, or at least order in Belarus. And right, last year's champion, Dynamo Minsk, is in first place on 35 points. They looked sketchy the first couple weeks. It was clear that they were missing some of their big players from last season. There were a lot of outgoing transfers. However, they've sort of like found the formula, and they've been unbeaten in their last seven, so they've been quite good. In second place is Torpedo Belaz, and again, they're right behind them. They're also on 35 points. Minsk has a much better goal difference, however. So that in Belarus, there's also a bit of a title race shaping up, and then you have Neyman Gordino at in third on 33 points. So those are your three European spots. If you put a gun to my head and said, "Who do you think is going to wind up winning this?" I'd still go with Dynamo Minsk. I said that at the beginning of the season. I thought, despite the outgoings, I think they did enough business in the transfer window to polish over some of that. And the core of the team from last year is still there. I still think they're going to win the league, but we'll see what happens. The thing which I think the biggest story out of Belarus is how bad former serial champions Bete Borisov have been. They are in 10th place at the moment, and they haven't really been good in the last 2 years, but they've been like sort of fourth, fifth, kind of knocking on those European places. They're abjectly terrible, and it's not a financial fair play. It's not a money thing. Like, it's they partially because they're in Belarus. They had to rely upon smart transfers and developing talent, and they did a wonderful job of that for 2 decades. Right? This is the team that took Bayern Munich and you had that famous result against Bayern Munich in the Champions League. Like, this is a club of note, the club of Alexander Heeb. Uh, but I don't know for whatever reason, their transfers haven't worked out. The quality of the youth coming up isn't very good. I've watched them 3 times this year, and they're bad. They're legitimately bad. Now they're too good to go down, but they've been terrible. And it's one of the this decline's been coming, but it's really this season where they seem to have hit an impasse, and something has to be done. And there's even crazy rumors out there that former Borisov manager and former CSKA Moscow manager Viktor Goncharенko might be returning. No word on that yet, but those are the rumors out there. So we'll see. We'll see. So in both of those leagues, you have title races, heading into the second half of the season. And so, it should be interesting. Now we have to shift to a league which is starting up, right? The Ukrainian Premier League, which is still going on despite, uh, war, begins this weekend. And I say without a hitch, but we'll see. because Ukrainian football and Eastern European football always throws surprises at you. And indeed, in the last 3 weeks, there's been a rather large surprise. Although, to be fair, and I'll go over some of the background here, maybe we should have saw this coming. So, FC Dnipro 1, which is named after the Dnipro 1 volunteer battalion, which was raised during the Revolution of Dignity in 2014 to, protect the city of Dnipro from pro-Russian separatists, etc. Uh, they've been in the Premier League since 2019. Uh, and right, just 2 years ago, they finished in second place, and they played European football last year, guys. This is the team. This is the club of Jobbik, right? And they were sort of the successor team to the historic club from the city, Dnipropetrovsk. And those of you who can remember, cast your minds back almost 10 years ago, 2015, and the Europa League final, and of course Sevilla won, but they won a really close match. The final score was 3-2 to Dnipropetrovsk, who, like I said, historic team, right? Won two Soviet championships in the 1980s, won the Soviet Cup once, and even though they never won the UPL, they were always kind of that third wheel behind Dynamo and Shakhtar. Sometimes that third wheel was Medlis Kharkiv. Sometimes, particularly early on in the 90s, it was Chernomorets Odessa. But Dnipro was, usually that nailed on third team, and they were always in, the Europa League or what have you. They were always, qualifying for European football. So Dnipro 1 was kind of the successor club to that, even though technically it wasn't. Uh, what happened to this historic club that existed in the city, Uh, Well, like all things in Ukraine, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the club, which was, uh, run by a state-sponsored institution, gets privatized and it gets gobbled up by the local, oligarch slash mafia chief, say what you will, in the area by the fellow by the name of Igor Kolomovsky. Now, Kolomovsky was at one point, I think Ukraine's second wealthiest person. He, made his fortune in really, again, shady circumstances, dealing in the energy sector, metallurgy, and right media, right. The current president of Ukraine, Victor you know, uh, Zelensky. Why am I blanking on his name? Vladimir Zelensky. Right, the show, which the Servant of the People, which he, his original claim to fame, was broadcast on one of Kolomovsky's channels, and during his, presidential, his campaign, a lot of people, sort of suggested that he was actually Kolomovsky's candidate because where does an actor all of a sudden get all this money and all this media exposure? This guy is currently in jail. Not because of what he did, well, sort of what he did with his, former football club. Right. He, like I said, he made his fortune in some unusual ways. And, in 2020, the US government was like, hey, we have a warrant for your arrest because of bank fraud. Right. And then, the Ukrainian government, which by this point had sort of kicked off the sort of first stages of its anti-corruption campaign, uh, they also brought him in. And indeed, he couldn't really even like operate independently in Ukraine. He was effectively in exile in Israel for about 5 or 6 years. I know on another football related podcast that I used to occasionally come on that only talked about the game in the post-Soviet space. We referred to him as that guy on the beach in Tel Aviv, right? So a dude of note, infamous, let's say. So he owned the club, the old club, FC Dnipro. And right, it's funny. They get to that Europa League final, and that was a good team, right? It was a young Gregor Stakoviak, Yevgen Konopalenka before like injuries totally derailed his career. Uh, Denis Boyko, some Ruslan Roatan, some really good players. Ruslan Malinovsky actually was on that team too. That was a really good team. Uh, but almost a year later, things are like totally dysfunctional. They get hit with a transfer ban, right? And there's rumors coming out, right? Because they sell a lot of their big players that summer and then the following January. And like there's weird, they never replace them. And there's these weird sort of rumors out there that like, no one's getting paid. And indeed, the club sold off its best assets. Kolomovsky pocketed the money, but he stopped paying not just the players, but also the staff, the lunch ladies, janitors, stewards, everybody didn't get paid. And right, he was forced to, uh, sell the team or step away from the club. But by that point, it was already donezo. And right, the club they got relegated that next season. They got relegated again the following season, and then in 2019 they just vanished. They stopped existing. They went insolvent. But just as that's going on, you get this other club, which actually is formed in 2017. So, like, just when FC Dnipro is really collapsing, and just when Kolomovsky sort of, stops being directly, connected to the club, he has to get rid of the club. Dnipro won, which starts off in the Ukrainian fourth division, but then gets promoted, and then eventually, excuse me, there was the third division. They get anyway. It's a bunch of straight promotions. So they're named after the Dnipro one division, or battalion, right? And from jump, things were a little right, because the Dnipro one battalion is funded and outfitted by Kolmovsky. It's essentially Kolmovsky's private army, right? It eventually gets uh, you know gets incorporated into the Ukrainian military, but it operates effectively as a private army for a while there. And right, the club ownership is two brothers, Maxime Bereza and his brother Yuri Bereza, who is a current MP in the Ukrainian Parliament, and right, the commanding commander and technically founder of the Dnipro One Battalion, and former Dnipro legend Ruslan Roatan. So it's the two Bereza brothers and Roatan 50-50. Okay, that seems cool. But again, club named after a battalion, which effectively was an oligarch guy who drove the old club that no longer exists, uh, into extinctions, private army. And look, none of these people, I mean, Roatan made some money, he's a professional footballer for, years, but, he never left Ukraine. He didn't make that much money. How did these two brothers and this ex-footballer get the money to buy this club? Weird, isn't it? So, but the club does well. They get promoted each year. They get promoted, and then in 2019 they're in the UPL, and then like I said, they finished second 2 seasons ago. And right, they've produced some pretty good players. Artem Diobik, who's at Girona, who might be on the move this summer. We're not sure. Right, didn't underperformed at the Euros, grossly underperformed at the Euros, but was the Golden Boot winner in the Liga. Right, and Ihor Yaramuk, who's at Brentford, who, I think is going to I think it's going to be very important this season for them. Right. So, they've produced talent and they've sold that talent, right, to Western European clubs. They finished third last year. They played in Europe. And, normally if I was doing this review, I'd probably mention them as, maybe the team that's not called Dynamo or Sparta or Shakhtar who can win the damn league. Uh, about 3 weeks ago, UEFA hit them with the transfer ban. And right, not surprising, right? Because when the news about all this initially broke, I posted it on the chat, and it was like, oh, well, this is a country in the middle of uh, war. There's not that much money coming in, so yeah, this is probably related to that, and in some ways it is. I'm positive if there wasn't a war going on, this story, we might not be talking about this. Flash forward a week after that, and the Ukrainian Premier League has an extraordinary meeting where 14 of the 16 clubs vote to throw Dnipro one out the league. Right. They can't play in the Ukrainian Premier League next year. Well, that's kind of crazy. But again, the thing is, okay, well, if they're getting hit with a transfer ban, it's financial difficulties related to the. Remember all that stuff I had mentioned before, that backstory, and that oligarch in prison and his friends who run the new club. So as all this is going on, then stories start to emerge, right? Because the reason they got the transfer ban and then they got booted out of the league was because they effectively stopped paying people. At least it was said they stopped paying people at the end of last season. No one got paid. Right. They let like 2/3 of the squad walk on freeze in the summer. But again, you're thinking, okay, this is again financial constraints due to the. So when they finished second 2 years ago, the manager was Igor Jovicic. And I was thoroughly impressed. He was my manager of the season in Ukraine 2 years ago. And he left and he took the Shakhtar job. And now he's back in, Croatia. But like he left so abruptly. Like it was weird. And nothing was ever said about it, but again, it was just strange. You have a guy who leads you to your best finish ever, and you're playing really attractive football, and then he just gets up and dips. Nothing was said about that, but now things are. So he came out, that week and said, I wasn't paid most of my time there, and neither was my staff. And we are owed money, which the right, Andre Russell and the Bezerra brothers have promised us. We haven't received any of it. And right when pressed, he was like he said he enjoyed his time there, but he always felt that this club wasn't as much a club as some kind of, in his own words, uh so yeah. And right, his successor, former Dnipropetrovsk legend Alexander Kucher, also came out that week and said, "I worked for nothing. My year and a half as the manager was volunteer work. I didn't get paid." And he also added, "No one got paid." And right, as we've heard more about the investigation, particularly by UEFA, it's real weird because, like, you have to submit your books and you have to submit outgoings and incomings and outgoings, and their books are fraudulent. The money for the Artem Jovic transfer and the Uramuk transfer, and indeed most transfers of note, over the last couple of years just aren't there. They're not accounted. So I didn't want to start my Ukraine preview with this because unfortunately this story it sucks because I think all of us can say we're kind of rooting for this league and the health of this league and the health of Ukrainian football. But it sucks doubly because it's these kinds of things. It's this level of corruption and shadiness, which we hope that when this freaking war is over, Ukraine's going to move beyond this, right? It's not going to be, okay, all of you guys died and you died for nothing because it's still this dysfunctional, kleptocratic mafia state. Right? We thought we were beyond, and indeed, the Ukrainian government over the last couple of years, even before the start of hostilities, was slowly starting to crack down on corruption. Well, this story reminds us that how much work has to be done and the real problems because yeah, some of this is part of this is a mixture of the fact that countries have war because right, would the corruption look quite as egregious if there was more money to be made? Maybe not, right? Maybe Kucher would have gotten like a paycheck or something, but like this predates the hostilities, and this is a black eye for Ukrainian football and for Ukraine, right? Because some of Ukraine's greatest enemies, their mantra is this is a corrupt country, we shouldn't give them aid because it'll just get pocketed. Stories like this give that line of thinking some credence. And it sucks. I hate talking about this, but we had to. So there's 15 teams in the league at the moment when there should be 16. Well, how are we going to figure that out? Well, I'll give the UPL credit. What they decided to do is, and by the way, Dnipro 1 effectively no longer exists, right? They weren't like relegated to the Pashaya Liga. They are being put on indefinite hold. They're in the naughty boy corner, and they may never exist again. Like this could be the end of this club in a very real way, right? So indeed, their website is just the website hasn't been updated. They probably didn't pay their web people either since May. Like it, so this may be the end of that club, and it sucks because that is a football town. I will just say that. So how are they going to resolve this issue, right? Because you're down a club, what it's like have like 5 weeks, you know. So what the league did, I'll give them credit. They effectively held a micro competition, and they sort of replayed the promotion relegation playoffs from last season. And indeed, tomorrow, which was Tuesday the 30th, we will is the final of that little micro competition where we will find out who Dnipro One's replacement will be. It is Livy Bera, which literally translates to left bank. It's a club from a neighborhood in Kiev, which is literally on the left bank of the Dnipro River, and Minima, which they got relegated last season from the UPL. I'm rooting for left bank for two reasons. One, look, I'm a Kiev guy, man. I'm so happy that we actually have a Kiev derby again. Like because when I first started watching Ukrainian football in the late '90s and the aughts, you know, it wasn't just Dynamo Kiev. It was Arsenal. It was Obolon, and the fact that Obolon's back is so cool because we hadn't had a proper Kiev derby in almost a decade, right? After Arsenal became insolvent and Obolon just got bad. Right. So having another Kievan team would be cool. And look, we saw Minya last year in the league. They're not good. And they haven't really done anything to improve themselves. I'd rather see a different team and see what we get from them. So the next time I report, we will know who the 16th team in the league is going to be. Predictions. I'll keep this kind of brief. Look, man, it's the Ukrainian football is, for better or for worse, a duopoly. It's Shakhtar, it's Dynamo. Who gonna be? Well, I think there's a case for both. Shakhtar, they loaded up as they always do on young Brazilians last summer. Some of them have come good, like the left winger Kevin, literally just Kevin. Some of them not so much. They've been non-entities, and right, the team. It's weird. So Rakititsky's gone, so he is called it a day. Right. Stepanenko, talk a little bit more about him in a second, is getting older, and he is the captain. He's the number six, the glue of that midfield. But look, he's declining. And the decline is more noticeable every season. And right, there is still, I know Ukraine didn't have a good Euros, but Sudakov is still a very well regarded player throughout Europe. And there is a chance he gets moved. I don't think he's going to get moved this summer. I think a move in January, probably uh, more likely, but it's possible he gets moved. In one way or another, he's probably going to get moved this season. They've brought in Alan Goram, a Tunisian center back, to replace Rakititsky. I've never heard of this guy. I'm not going to pretend that I know anything about him, but he's a body at that position. And they brought in Bartol Franjic, the Croatian from Wolfsburg in Germany, who I am aware of. And he has to be the long-term Taras Stepanenko successor, right? Because he is a defensive midfielder and they need a younger six in the worst way possible. So, they won the league last year, but there's some questions. They've patched up some holes, but have they gotten any better? And the questions about them are still up front. Like their strike force is their two nines are Lanissa Torore, who's can do a job. He's serviceable. And then Yellow Seacon, who I can't figure out who this guy is. He's when he's good, he's really good. When he's bad, he's non-existent. He does nothing. So, that's Shakhtar. And then you have Dynamo Kiev, who the geriatric Romanian is gone. And Alexander Shavorsky is officially the full-time manager. And look, we were great the second half. After the winter break, we were by record and by any measure the best team in the league. Can we keep that up going into the league campaign? Well, we'll see, right? We're playing, Champions League qualifying as we speak. But man, that got off to a really good start. I mean, we curb stomped Partizan Belgrade 6-2. And this team, it's a really good mixture of youth and established veterans, right? Uh and so I think my boys have a puncher's chance, and we've been quite kind of quiet in the transfer window, but we didn't really have that many holes to fill. We've still never really replaced Zambrani. I mean, Dennis Popov's a really good center back. We we've brought in some young guys. We gave Alexander Sorota, his 18th chance to prove that he could actually play center back. He failed, and he's off to, I believe, Israel. He got moved. So the one transfer of note is Colombian center back Brian Salibas, which when I initially read that, I was very confused because for some reason I thought we had bought the Spanish guy that Arsenal used to have, Salibas. And I'm like, no, this is Colombian Salibas. It's center back Salibas. Dude's pretty young. He's 20. He just turned 23. And from what I have read, he is somewhat highly regarded. Will he start the season as the partner to Popoff in the center of defense? I don't know. Right, he didn't feature at all against Partizan Belgrade, but he's a guy. He's tall. He's athletic. They claim he's fast, so it's going to be interesting. Uh I am, like I always do, going to pick my boys to win the league. But right, we'll see. We'll see. It's gonna be one of those two, regardless. However, if it's not those two, it's not the usual suspects. Who is it going to be? Kylian Boss played out of their freaking minds last year, and like they deserve from the front office, from the board down, so much credit. And they still have Yuri Vontrub, who's one of my favorite Ukrainian managers of all time, my manager of the season last year. But they really haven't improved. If anything, they've been poached right by their immediate rivals. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do because I think they were playing with house money last year and they faded the second part of the season. They started off like a house on fire and then they did fade. They're going to be part of the equation, but if there's a sleeper team, I will say this: it is Poliasia, who finished fourth last season. Uh, and on the one hand, it's kind of tough because they've made the most transfers by far in the league. They brought in something like 13 players, which that could throw the balance of things off, right? That could be a bad thing, not a good thing. But what I'll say about Polizia is they brought in the players they brought in really interesting. They kind of brought in Dynamo Kiev's under 21 squad. They brought in a lot of kids, a lot of guys who I'm familiar with, and they brought in a bunch of maybe this is their strategy now. Shakhtar gets Brazilians. They brought in four young players from Congo Brazzaville, not you know Democratic Republic, not DR Congo. Uh, and so like we'll see what happens, but I'm very intrigued. Right. And then in terms of relegation, look, I'm not the bottom half of this league is always hard to predict. One thing I will say, and we saw it sort of last year, if I'm a fan of Zaroya Luhansk, I am scared. And the reason I'm scared is as successful as they've been, as solid as they've been over the years. Uh, this current crop of younger players that they've brought up really haven't been very good. They haven't been great in the transfer market, be it incomings or outgoings. Their best players the last couple of years have been guys from Dynamo Kiev who are on loan, who they polished up and then we brought back. So it's a small squad. It's an inexperienced squad, and arguably their best player, the center back, Bartov. There's rumors that he's going to go this summer, and if he goes, I think they're screwed. So if you're a fan of, I'm not saying they are going to get relegated. Again, the bottom half of this league is unpredictable. Always is. I'd be worried. And finally, before we call it a video, I'm going to talk about a couple transfers and potential transfer rumors from that league in Eastern Europe that we used to talk about, but we don't now. But some weird things have happened over the last 2 months. So, right, FC Krasnodar, which was is owned and was founded by a local oligarch by the name of Sergei Galitsky. Uh, Unlike Zenit, which is obviously owned by Gazprom, which is owned by Vladimir Putin, Spartak, which is owned by Lukoil, which means owned by Vladimir Putin, CSK Moscow, which is still half owned by the Russian army, Lokomotiv Moscow, which is owned by Russian railways, FC Krasnodar is not one of these clubs in Russia that's actually sanctioned. So technically, they could do business abroad. Now, they haven't in the last couple of years because the climate of doing business with anyone in Russia isn't all that great. But technically, they can do business, and Galitsky's an oligarch, but he's not anti-Putin. Otherwise, he wouldn't have a football club or maybe a life. But right, he's not one of these guys like Roman Abramovich, for example, who's like attached to Putin or attached to like the war machine. The guy made his shady fortune because he was on the ground floor of when, Soviet state-owned grocery stores privatized. Dude owns grocery stores, mad groceries. FC Krasnodar, I think, when people and myself still watch Russian football, was like regardless of what team you rooted for, it was your unofficial second favorite team because the ethos was so cool. Like Galitsky was a degenerate football fan. He didn't just want to buy players. He was like, "We'll be bad for a while. What I want to do is to use this club as kind of an academy for all of Russia and all of the post-Soviet space. And right, I want to take young players and I want to polish them up, and we want to win that way. And we'll make transfers. We'll bring in foreign players when we feel we need to. But ultimately, this is about making local football better and providing resources to do so, right? Because after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s in particular, with the exception of like the big establishment clubs in Moscow, like Russian football takes a huge hit. The infrastructure takes a huge hit. So, this guy comes around, he's like, look, I want to use my money, which is misbegotten, but my money to resolve this issue. So I think everyone had like a respect for this. And indeed, if you look at the talent that's come through there, they were heading in that direction, right? They when at the time of the invasion a couple years ago, they were sitting in second place. Now, would they have won the league? I have no idea. But they were firmly the second best team in the country. There haven't been many transfers really at all incoming. There's been some incomings from places like Latin America and Africa, but not real, and Serbia, right? Of course. But like, there haven't really been outgoing, transfers of players from the RPL, particularly Russian players, until this summer. Krasnodar has sold two players, one Russian, one non-Russian. So they sold Katie Borges for 15 mil, not insignificant, to Brest in France. And then the big one, which is sort of head scratching, is remember, they have Donnarumma. He is their starting goalkeeper, or is he? PSG spent 25 million on Matvei Savanov, who's by the way, he's a really, really good goalkeeping prospect, and he's still very young. But I remember that transfer happened. I believe it was the day the Euros kicked off, and I was like, "This is weird," and this is weird because a PSG is doing business with a Russian club, and this is a high-profile Russian player. I know Arsene Zakarian moved to Spain, but he effectively ran out his contract. He, I think, is still actively seeking Armenian citizenship, so he doesn't want to really even be Russian anymore. This kid he's Russian, Russian, Russian. Right. And there's rumors now that their other big piece, the attacking midfielder Edward Stepnartsian, who is Armenian, by the way, might be on the move to Monaco or Marseille sometime in the next couple of weeks. I don't know what this means. And if there was a team in Russian football which could sell, legitimate talent to the West that was still not sanctioned, which is important, it would be Krasnodar. But this is really interesting because we've seen some moves for, with picking up Russian players. But again, it's mostly been like Serbia, Greece, Turkey, not Western Europe, not France. So this is interesting and something to pay attention to. And right, the teams that are sanctioned, I think this is fascinating. You're seeing a lot of their big players, including Russians, deliberately wind down their contract. Anton Moranchuk, the brother of Alexei Moranchuk, who is at Atlanta in Italy. And he was the captain of Lokomotiv Moscow. He uh he let his contract wind down, and it looks like there's going to be a Moranchuk brother reunion in Italy coming soon. Uh and this one I think is fascinating because like I said, I used to watch the RPL. Igor Daviev, the center back for CSK Moscow, a guy, one of the handful of Russian players that could have walked away from that, not the last, but the last before last Euros with his head held high. That tournament was a disaster for them. But he actually played really well. Uh, Young center back, I think he just turned 24 or 25. Uh, Best center back in the league when I stopped watching. He's apparently uh he's apparently rejected a contract extension and a substantial pay raise from CSK Moscow. And his contract is up at the end of the year. And before the invasion, this guy was linked with Atletico Madrid, Arsenal, PSG, Inter Milan, AC Milan, like big clubs were sort of interested in this guy. And the name, he's fallen off because, of course, who cares? He's playing in Russia. Well, he could become available this time next year. And I think that's really interesting. So these are things to watch over the next couple months, particularly again, sort of what Krasnodar is doing, because for all intents and purposes, there's been no business between Western European clubs, Russian clubs. Now, when PSG throws 25 mil at a goalkeeper, when Brest pays 15 mil, Brest is a small club, for a Brazilian guy, and right, if Sebastian gets moved, he's good, by the way. Or at least when I last saw him, he was really good. Uh, this is interesting. And again, big name Russian players, clubs that are sanctioned, winding down their contracts and leaving them free. These are things to watch out for. Anyway, gang, hopefully we're going to be back in the saddle pretty soon. I don't know if we're going to be doing recording this week or not, but this will be up before the start of Ukrainian League matches this weekend. You can watch them free on YouTube. Right, so check that out. And right, I'm going to be at the Liverpool Arsenal preseason friendly in Philadelphia on Wednesday night. So maybe I will record something, right, and we'll shoot that out there, but we'll see what we'll see. And I myself will try to be back on this channel with another Eastern European update sometime in August. All right, gang. This is Professor Matt for the Too Many Guys Soccer Show. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. Take care.